I'm Frank Newport, Gallup editor-in-chief. Welcome to Election Matters. The debt ceiling crisis, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton.
I'm Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today. We'll take a look at the 5 top contenders for the Republican presidential nomination. The only problem is only 2 of them are actually running.
Another state has now legalized same-sex marriage. What impact, if any, will that have on the 2012 election? And finally, our most interesting finding of the week. Susan, no question that the big news story is the continued saga of the negotiations over the debt ceiling. A lot of implications and a lot of players and a lot of complexities. Of course, our focus here is on the election. Do we have any sense yet whether or not this is going to have an impact and who will benefit from the impasse when it comes time to vote next year?
You know, if you look at our findings so far, President Obama does a bit better than the Republicans when it comes to approval on how he's handling it. But it's still a pretty mixed bag. Both sides are getting some damage to their reputations with Americans by the failure to be able to address this issue.
Obama's job approval rating, we just looked at it for the week ending Sunday, is at 43%, and that's tied for the lowest weekly average that he's had since he's been in office. He's been at 43 some other weeks, but he's back down to 43 now. That can't be positive news for the Obama administration in terms of re-election, because any president that's got 43 fast forward to a year from now, is probably going to lose re-election.
And Amy Walter of ABC had an interesting a column that she wrote in the past week where she talked about the cognitive dissonance between President Obama's approval rating and his approval rating on handling the economy. Now, we know if the debt ceiling debate goes badly, it has the potential to really hurt the economic growth. If it does that, we would expect to see President Obama's approval rating sink even lower. His approval rating on handling the economy already is pretty low.
You know, that reminds me of something that we look back in August of 1991. You remember that? We were both kids, of course. We wrote at the time that George H.W. Bush was sailing along with a 71% job approval rating. And again, that was the summer before he was running for re-election, very similar to where Obama is now. However, apropos what you just said, the cautionary point we made then was his approval on the economy was down in the 30s, even though his overall approval was in the 70s. And, of course, it was the economy that did him in the next year.
That's sobering news, or a situation for the Obama administration, if you think of that as a potential parallel for what he'll face next year.
Bill Clinton had a similar situation, did he not? Not running against George H.W. Bush, but after he won back in 1995, there was this same kind of battle. That time it was between him and Speaker Newt Gingrich. They were battling over the deficit and a budget and all that. Government shut down. But, you know, Susan, his job approval rating in those fateful months, November and December back in 1995, that is Clinton's, was above 50%. So he was better situated, it looks like, then than Barack Obama is now.
You know, that was a turning point to improve President Clinton's reputation with Americans and also to hurt Newt Gingrich and the Republican House majority that had taken over. I remember when the White House went into that showdown, they weren't sure how that would play out, but it turned out to be a real pivot point for that White House.
And the same thing could happen now. We don't know how it's going to play out. But Obama is kind of going into this less well-situated than was Bill Clinton, and that's not a good sign either for the White House.
But trying to make the same point that Bill Clinton did, which is that he's being flexible and the adult and willing to compromise, and the Republicans are not.
A lot's going to be have to wait and be seen as this thing develops. We really don't know what its impact is. Speaking of which, you're following the candidates. I don't hear a lot of news coverage of the GOP candidates getting involved in this whole debt and crisis and deficit and all that's going on.
It's the gift of not being the incumbent, where you can avoid some issues that are kind of tricky. The only candidates who are really being forced to take a firm position are Michelle Bachmann and Ron Paul, because they'll have to actually vote in the House when these measures come up. But the other candidates, including the leading candidate, Mitt Romney, are trying to avoid it.
Trying to avoid talking about it at all. Do you think it'll be a factor in the general election next year?
I think it could be. If it turns out to be one of those things that either made the economy better or worse, you know we're going to be talking about it in a year.
New data now on the GOP candidates, Susan. And boy, I think it comes down to 5 candidates is what it's looking like now. When we look at both our new trial heat number, we just asked the data. We're going to release it in a couple of days. Who would you vote for? And then our weekly positive intensity. 5 candidates do better than any others.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's Mitt Romney, and then it is 3 who are not running. Rudy Giuliani and Rick Perry, who does very well, and Sarah Palin. And then in the mixture there is Michelle Bachmann.
Yeah, this has got to be bad news for people like John Huntsman and Tim Pawlenty, who've been out there running, raising money, can't break through. They're still down very low in single digits in your new findings. And if they don't break through to the top 5, how can we take them seriously as a potential nominee? You know, we may have Rick Perry jump in the race. That's possible. But it doesn't look so far like Sarah Palin's running. And Rudy Giuliani, maybe he'll run. But this could be a sign of Republicans' general tepid attitudes toward the field, the choices they've got.
Yeah, we have, in our trial heat, we have 5 candidates between 17 and about 11%, right in that little range. There are 5 candidates, none of them breaking out, and they're the 5 I mentioned just a minute ago.
And we call Mitt Romney a frontrunner, but that is a pretty weak frontrunner status.
Yeah, Rick Perry, actually, among those who know him, generates more positive intensity than does Mitt Romney in our new weekly numbers. So he's only known by 55%, Perry, at this point, the governor of Texas. But if he jumps in, he's got a real fervent base behind him.
Yeah, he'll be interesting to watch.
Other news this week, don't ask, don't tell kind of became policy without much discussion, did it not? And then with a lot more discussion and hoopla, legalized gay marriage was instituted this weekend in New York City.
You know, it was interesting when President Obama certified the lifting of Don't Ask, Don't Tell last Friday. There was not even much news coverage of it. It seemed to not cause much controversy. You remember the controversy when that policy was first instituted early in President Clinton's presidency. Now, the issue of gay marriage, I think, does divide Americans more. We know now that a majority of Americans support the idea of same-sex marriage, but a third and more of Americans oppose it, and the intensity is stronger with the opposition than with those who support it.
By the way, I said New York City, of course, is legal in all of New York State, but a lot of the attention's in New York City. Will it be an issue next year? When you got a majority supporting these two policies, will the Republicans bring it up in the general election, try to make that, the weakening of Americans' morals an issue, do you think?
Well, I think both parties have some peril here. The Democrats, because they don't want to put off those independent voters and more moderate voters who might not like the idea of gay marriage. The Republicans, too, their base clearly strongly opposed to gay marriage, but boy, what a risk for them to be on the wrong side of an issue that now gets majority support, especially among the young people who were such a strong factor for President Obama in 2008.
And President Obama's treading that line. He's not officially announced he supports gay marriage. Is that accurate?
But he's done everything but that, including announcing that the federal government, his Justice Department, will not try to defend the Defense of Marriage Act, which would ban gay marriage and ban federal federal recognition of same-sex couples.
And you've got a good point. If the Republican candidate comes out strongly opposed to it, they run the risk of losing that valuable youth vote next year in the general election.
Yeah, and a lot of independent-minded voters and some libertarians that are inclined to be Republicans, but on this issue would agree with the Democrats.
Most interesting finding of the week, in my opinion, looking over a lot of our poll data, comes in a question we just asked about the Tea Party. We asked Republicans, do you support the Tea Party or not? About 60% do, and that generally fits with other polling data. But we followed up and said, are you a strong supporter of the Tea Party? And only 10% of Republicans said they were a strong supporter. So you've really got a three-way. You got a small sliver who are very strong supporters, a big group, like half of Republicans who say, yeah, I support it, but not strongly, and then about a third or a little more who say they're opponents. Does that surprise you?
So does that mean that we are overestimating the influence of the Tea Party in the GOP?
It could be the case. We're looking at the data, trying to figure it out. This is the first time we've asked it. So, are you a very strong supporter? Maybe that's too strong of an adjective to use, but all we can say is when you ask people that, Republicans, only 10% say they're very strong supporters.
And to go back to our first topic, if the Tea Party gets blamed for intransigence that leads us to a failure to raise the debt ceiling in time, maybe that will hurt their support among some Republicans.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. That's Election Matters. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup's editor-in-chief.
And I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today.